On today's episode, we are excited to welcome Simon Kulkov, a seasoned product designer and US strategist with over a decade of experience crafting intuitive, user-friendly digital experiences. Simon has worked across e-commerce, fintech, gaming, and enterprise software, designing impactful solutions that enhance customer engagement and streamline workflows. Currently, Simon is a lead product designer at Grab, where he focuses on designing data platform and improving enterprise security solutions. Before that, he held senior product design roles at Miro, Ansarada, and Lazada, a Alibaba company, where he helped shape the user experience for millions of customers across Southeast Asia. His expertise in design thinking, value proposition design, and customer research has allowed him to create seamless digital experience that drives growth and innovation. Simon's design philosophy is rooted in understanding user needs, problem solving through research, and balancing functionality with aesthetics. Whether it's improving collaboration tools, redesigning commerce platforms, or innovating fintech solutions, his work reflects a deep commitment to human-centered design and continuous improvement. In today's episode, we will explore Simon's journey in the world of UX, his approach to building user-friendly enterprise products, and how he leverages design thinking to create impactful solutions. Be very welcome.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you for having me here. Happy to chat about all the things.
I thank you for accepting our invitation. It's very good to have you here. I see that you have a lot of experience across many different kind of industries, and I would like to understand better what does work-life balance mean to you, and how do you achieve it?
That's a very good question. Thank you. I think probably it's a big answer. There is lots of aspects to work-life balance. I think probably one of the most important ones is taking care of yourself. I think also maybe reflecting back to during the COVID times, that was very obvious and self-evident that we do need to prioritize ourselves and take care of both physical and mental health. But that was a good lesson also for the other times, for us to actually, eat healthy, do some stretching at least, or exercises, going out, having a bit of time with nature. I think there is even some scientific research that says that people are actually able to heal when they spend more time with nature. So I think seeing, green trees and grass and seeing sunset is actually something that helps us a lot to stay healthy and recover as well. I mean, those are important things. Of course, we also might have families, and we might want to spend more time with our families and the loved ones. Again, that's kind of emotions that fulfill us and our lives and help us stay on track. So that's also important aspect. And I think when we come to actual like work-life balance, right? Like if we try to understand what is actually like hindering us from having the work life balance, right? I think a lot of times people tend to overwork, and companies also tend to get the most out of employees and out of processes and everything possible. And I think it's important to, of course, keep in mind that we are all humans. We need to kind of rest and recover. We need to be fresh. Again, there is plenty of research that says that even short regular breaks help us to recover. But the same thing in the long run, like we always need to prioritize ourselves and actually take a break, go for a vacation or spend time with family, spend time with nature. Sometimes you just need to have some time for yourself, because for yourself, right? Because you need to kind of rest and digest. Also, I think scientific phrase, which is quite insightful. But I think one of my kind of key philosophy points on the work-life balance is that you actually have to work smart and not 8 hours per day. That's exactly how I say it, because of course, like most of us probably who work on the regular jobs come to office sometime in the morning, like whether it's 8, 9, or 10 a.m., and we work about 8 hours per day. And that's kind of considered a norm, and that's considered a norm by most of the companies, so that you kind of have to stick to the schedule. Some companies might even tell you that, hey, you have to show up at 9 a.m. in the office and basically not having this much freedom. But I think the reality is that we actually need to be smart, not in a way like smarter than someone, but like we need to pay attention to our efficiency. And I think that you can actually deliver great results by working less because you actually take proper time again to like rest and recover. I also think that again, I don't have good scientific base. There is some evidence that if you actually rest and let your mind absorb what you've just learned, you will actually be more productive and you will generate better results. So I think that's probably more important than working from 9 to 6, which is quite interesting. Yeah, there is plenty of other things how this can be achieved, right? But I think like having some proper time off. But yeah, one of the things probably I also inspire is how people in Australian and New Zealand region kind of take work on Fridays. And maybe I'm wrong about this, and maybe it's not actually like that broad as I think. But first, I've heard about it from one of my managers who was from New Zealand, and she told me, "Oh, on Friday we don't work; we just have wine." And I thought she's making a joke, and I was like, "Okay, I cannot believe that that it's true." And eventually, I joined an Australian company, and I was actually here in Vietnam, in one of their offices here. I couldn't feel the same exact vibe here in the office on a Friday. It was kind of relaxed, but it's not like people don't actually do anything. And I was like, okay, it's interesting, but it's not the same. And once I went for a business trip to the headquarter in Sydney, and what I was surprised to see on Friday is that actually people start socializing after lunch break, and they actually do really have wine and beers in the office. Alcohol is bad for your health, of course. I agree with that. So it's your choice whether you want to have juice or coffee or tea or water or whatever else, right? But the fact is that the company is okay for actually for people to go and socialize, build connections with each other, share what they've learned, or have some ideas exchange and things like that. And I think that's probably a part of success for them as well, because they actually do more with less in a way. So I think also like work life balance in a way is like do more with less. And by saying that, I mean you don't have to spend more time to achieve more. You can actually spend less time to achieve great results as well.
Thank you for that. Your sharing is really amazing because you talk about very interesting points that goes over culture, it goes over high performance teams, and also about communication. Because as we understand, the better the communication, the more effective the team is. And also it comes the point where you talk about take a good rest, because this is also a way to reset yourself, refresh yourself for the challenge that you have in the next day. I would like to know more about that, if you could please share, considering that we are not in a sprint, we are actually in a marathon.
I think when it comes to rest, there is plenty of different things you can do, and I think the best way is you actually find out yourself what works for you. There was actually interesting experience that I met a 3D artist, like a friend of my friend, who was coming here to visit in Vietnam, and we were talking something about meditation. And I was like, "Hey, I'm meditating sometimes," and he told me, "But why do you need to meditate?" He said that you just lie on a couch or whatever, like beanbag or some place, and you just look at the ceiling. You just let it all go. And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And he's like, "Yeah, you don't need any kind of meditation skills. You don't need to do anything special. You don't need to come up with any like fancy techniques or anything. You just lie down there, look at the ceiling, let it just go. That's all." And I was like, "Yeah, that's actually quite interesting." And I guess the interesting point that I got from this is that it's not about specific like rule or technique that you might read in the book or share from like learn from some influencers online, but it's actually more about your own way of like resting and resetting. Maybe you actually just need to lie down and look into the ceiling. Maybe meditation works for you. Maybe going for a short walk helps you as well. So I think in my case, I've been practicing mindful meditation for quite a while. I've used a free app called Oak. It's not commercial, so it's not really an advertisement because they don't charge money for anything. unlike others. And it's a good way to actually get started and understand what meditation is and how to do it. And I think it's been very helpful for me in terms of settling the chaotic thoughts in the mind, because a lot of times we actually have a lot of them. And sometimes when you being mindful and focusing on breathing, you start noticing how many thoughts you actually have in your mind, which will pass by. And the interesting thing is that those thoughts can be completely random. They might not be even related to your current day. But I think a good analogy here would be comparing, human to a computer. Computer has like most of the OS. I think probably all of them have the kind of activity monitor where you can see which processes do I have running right now, right? And the interesting thing with that is when you meditate, you actually bring up that activity monitor in a way. In the same time, you kind of send the command saying, okay, I'm okay to let go any of those processes. So if they stop, that's okay. And basically, first of all, you start noticing how many processes you had running in your background. It could be family related, it could be something that happened last year, it could be something that was like, hey, I need to buy, I don't know, some item for your house. And actually it was coming from last month, but it's actually somehow is still in your, like in your RAM, in your memory. And it's kind of bothering you in the background. And so that's one of the way to kind of see it and let it go. But I think by doing this, by letting it go, you're actually also acknowledging that those thoughts exist, right? And so I think it kind of maybe somehow resonates with the methodology of getting things done, I think by David Allen, right? Where the idea is that you actually have to sit down and you have to put all the things in your mind into inbox. And you don't need to worry about trying to categorize it, trying to put it into the right order and put it the right priority. It's more about flushing it out into inbox, and then you will deal with it later. The same thing here, but I think meditation is more of like kind of free up memory, free up RAM exercise for your brain comparing to the kind of computer analogy. And that's been quite interesting way of resetting for me, and it's been helpful. It's making like my mind and focus a lot better and fresher after doing this exercise. But what I recently discovered, and so this meditation type is called body scan meditation. Previously, I've tried multiple times to do the progressive muscle relaxation exercise, and actually, I think that's also a good one. If you're curious to know what this is, you can just go to YouTube. You can find plenty of videos. You can also find this in like Spotify or Apple Music. Pretty much all streaming services will have some version of that, so you can always find it useful. And so the body scan meditation turned out to be very similar to progressive muscle relaxation, except that when you do progressive muscle relaxation, you actually have to tense each muscle of your body one by one and kind of going top to bottom or bottom to top, depending on how you want to do it, or depending on how the guide will take you through it. And with the body scan meditation, the process is actually slightly different because it's pretty much it's a mental exercise. So you have to acknowledge how do you feel in different parts of the body. So you actually might have a lot of tension hidden in your muscles. And again, that's not a joke, right? It could be due to different reasons. It could be because of the posture that you're taking while you're working, but it also could be because of the way you sleep. It also could be due to emotions that you're experiencing because, a lot of times when you're experiencing fear, it can manifest in your muscles in different parts of the body. I think it's quite unique for everyone, but maybe there is also some commonalities. And the thing that happens with body scan meditation is after you've done it through the whole body, top to bottom, for example, you actually sort of again acknowledge that you have this tension in your body here and there, or you have some other feelings. And by the time you've done with this, you kind of get a little bit of a kind of body reset. You feel yourself better in your own body and not driven by some external events or by emotions that you're experiencing, which is quite interesting. And so like that's other way for me to actually go and reset. I'm trying to also start using it and doing it more in my day-to-day routine. And I wouldn't say that I'm trying to do it like I have a schedule for it or anything. And I think that's also okay. I think that we all need to acknowledge that if you don't stick to something every day, or like with certain cadence you want to stick to, that's okay. I mean, like, as far as you repeating it, that's okay too, because maybe that's the way to establish the habit. Because a lot of times people think, oh, if I don't do it for 1 week, I'll quit it and I will never do it again, because I didn't manage to do it for 1 week means that I should quit now. And so I think that's a good point as well. And the other thing, which is also quite interesting, is I'm not a gymmer, I'm not any kind of health coach or whatever, but what I noticed working for myself, and I actually heard it from some coaches, I think, in the past, who were saying like, hey, you need to go for 1 hour run. And I was like, but why? I'm not a runner, I don't want to run. And back then I couldn't understand what's the thing. So eventually, over years, what I learned is that actually it doesn't have to be running, it could be any kind of cardio exercise. It could be actually walking, or it could be swimming. I think the whole point here, and a lot of actually folks that I know go to gym and they say that they are pumping weights, lifting weights, and they are saying that they will not do cardio because cardio is not for them, because it doesn't work for them. But I think the key point with cardio is that you actually pump a lot of oxygen to your muscles, and most importantly to the brain, which I'm not sure happening if you lift weights, right? So at least when you do cardio, you intentionally pump a lot more oxygen into your system. And as we know, oxygen is almost like a fuel to our brain, and we need a lot of oxygen for our brain to function properly. So to me, it's also a good way to actually reset and recover. And again, like, once I get the brain filled with oxygen, I feel a lot better, clear mind and thinking. So I think those would be the things which are quite important. And yeah, that's what helps me stay on track. And the thing is, to the work-life balance, right? I think it's important to have flexibility at work in terms of actually doing those things. So if you feel like you cannot continue without a break, and you feel like you need a meditation, you actually should go and do it, because that's something that will actually recharge you. If you feel like you are not feeling well physically, as like, I don't know, you're feeling too tired, or you're feeling too much tension or whatever, maybe it's a good time to actually go for a walk and, do some sweating and pump some oxygen to your brain, because that would be helpful. And that's the question of work-life balance and flexibility, right? Like, would the company be okay with that? Is that okay or not? And yeah, so how this works. Yeah, so I think those were the points about the rest and health. And we also had a couple of points about the communication and teamwork, right? And sprint and the marathon. I don't even know how do I lead to that point to connect those two topics, right? But I think it's more of, I think it's getting to the point of maybe physical and emotional well-being rather than just work-life balance, but it's still a good topic. Maybe I'll also like speak from my personal experience, because it's an interesting one. There could be examples, especially with either remote work or work with distributed offices. Sometimes you come to work, whether it's at home or you come into the office which is distributed, and most of your team is actually in another office. You don't feel okay. You don't feel okay mentally and physically. And I don't mean that you have a problem. It's rather that you don't feel, kind of energized enough. You don't feel like you are doing something great. And I think the reason why this happens is purely the human interaction aspect, because you actually, at least for me, when I talk to other people, when I exchange ideas, somehow I get more energy, not less. People think that, oh, if I spend time with someone and we talk about something, that I will lose energy. Maybe that's the case for some people, but for me it's actually the opposite. Like, usually I myself get more energy from such interactions. I do like to share ideas. I do like to listen other people's ideas and learnings and stuff like that. So usually that's very, very helpful. So yeah, I think it's important to have those interactions, and it could be actually remote as well, right? So the way I solve it is by setting one-on-ones with people and actually having some extra interactions. It's also great if it's like 5-10 extra minutes for coffee chat, some random thoughts, just to try to connect with people on the personal level, versus just being transactional, like, hey, okay, we have this ticket to resolve, or here is a document I put together, let's start. Yeah, okay, you can do that, but how long can you actually run like that? We are all humans. We probably want to understand, like, learn more about each other and exchange emotions, and uh, somehow just be humans. And the other aspect about humans and interactions is, I think, collaboration and how we produce results together versus by ourselves, which is quite interesting. And I think it's like one of the biggest problems, definitely not the primary one, but one of the biggest problems in modern IT companies, that most of the companies that I worked for always have a goal of, not to say it negatively, fighting, but resolving an issue of working in silos. It was not a joke. It was literally at every company I worked at. And at first I was like, what is silos? What's going on? And so it turns out the silos are a way of working when departments or teams do not talk to each other, and they just prefer to stay in their own kind of small little world, because if they talk to other department or other team, they might bring more problems. And if they bring more problems, like, why would I actually go and do that? I think, yes, that's important to acknowledge and recognize that there is such problem, but I think there is also a problem of personal silos, which is something that not many people talk about. And I don't know if anyone actually talked about it. It just came to my mind. But the idea is that people can be in their own silos at a personal level. As, like, I come to work, I just do my thing. And if people come to me, I will do what's needed, but I will actually not go and socialize with other people, especially from other departments, because why? It has nothing to do with mine, right? Which is quite interesting. And I also think that silos as a meaning is actually, like, it comes from the past. It's basically a long tower, right, that was storing grain. And basically, I guess, it's not like a big open space. It's something that is vertical and isolated. Coming back to the point of communication and collaboration, I think it's important to connect with people and share ideas, because sometimes you might get an inspiring idea from a person from another department. Why? I don't know. It's just the randomness of universe, I guess. But sometimes you surprisingly find that, oh, this other department was actually solving a problem similar to mine, even though the context is very different. But you might actually find something useful and interesting there, and you can, just go and apply. Sometimes you find people who can actually help you outside of your team or your department, which is also quite interesting. Sometimes people will be like, oh, would you like to run a workshop for us, or, like, somehow also help you. It's kind of a win-win situation, because they help you to progress with your career, but in the same time you also help them to resolve some of the questions they have. The other thing is about, I think, the common, maybe, battle that's going on in most of the IT companies, kind of waterfall versus agile versus a lot more different ways of working. And I still, interestingly enough, even in 2025, 21st century, I still see, and I don't mean any specific company, it's just a general observation based on, like, people I talk to and things like that. I still see there is artifacts of waterfall. Like, there is a lot of people who somehow still prefer to kind of uh, do their part of the job and then pass it on to another chain, and then expect them to do something else, and then they pass it to the next chain, and so on and so on. But what I've learned myself, and what I've seen from my experience as being designer, is that when you take two people in one room, and you start producing ideas, or would be even better if you actually take a group of people with diverse experiences and diverse perspectives, those people will generate a lot more. And here comes this phrase, or, like, equation that in the past I considered kind of bizarre and strange: 1 + 1 = 3. So, long time ago I thought, what does it actually mean? Like, are people insane? Like, why do they say 1 + 1 = 3? It's mathematically, it's wrong. It shouldn't be the case. And for quite a long time I thought, it's insane, it's nonsense. Like, I cannot even understand why do people say that. And eventually, with experience, I think, once I've seen that if you take two individual people and you ask them to work in silos and produce some ideas and results, let's say one person will produce, I don't know, 3 ideas, and another person will produce 4. Eventually you have 7 ideas. And that's pretty much it, right? They will just produce 3 plus 4, 7 ideas. But if you take those same people and put them in one room, they will probably produce those 7 ideas within a few minutes, like maybe 10, 20 minutes. It depends, right, on the size of the problem and everything, but I'm just using time here as a reference. Eventually, if you give them some time, they will probably have a few rounds of discussions and critique. What I've also observed myself is that a lot of times people actually observe and steal, and they steal in a good way, like artists. They basically look at other people's sticky notes, because usually we designers prefer to work with sticky notes. It's a good way to capture idea at the generic level. And what I see is that people look at those sticky notes. Sometimes could be also some kind of sketches of like what this product might look like. They get inspired, and a lot of times they actually get inspired by misinterpretation of the idea, which is also quite interesting because it's not like they're trying to build on top of your idea. They actually understood your idea wrong, but they came up with a better idea. And so eventually you produce a new, entirely unique idea based on something that was wrongly interpreted by that person, which is quite interesting. And there is lots of interesting dynamics that happen when people get together and start solving the same problem in a group, in the same in the same room, or it could be also a virtual room, because uh, at Miro, we first of all, Miro is kind of remote first product, so it's a whiteboard that allows people to actually collaborate in real time, whether you are in the same room or over a Zoom call. And I myself actually worked a lot with hybrid setups, and we also worked a lot in the remote setups during COVID times. And what is interesting is that actually, yes, there is a lot of different dynamics how people generate new ideas in the same room, in the same group. And also, I think if people follow, like, it doesn't have to be any specific methodology, but I think it has to be some kind of sprints, as like, hey, now let's time frame it. Let's do some, like first round of ideas for 10 minutes, and so everyone will just go and contribute, create some capture some ideas on sticky notes, sketches, whatsoever, put it there, and then you can have 10 minutes for discussion and basically go through this, and everyone will have a chance to present idea, maybe ask questions, and basically kind of exchange round. And so you can go on to the next round where you will basically improve on your original outputs. And so eventually, by the time of like 1 hour or 2 hours, depending on how long your session is, you actually have a lot more ideas by that time. And so what I realized is that those people would actually not produce the same work, not of the same quality and not in the same amount, if they would work separately in silos, whether it's a team silo or a personal silo. That's quite interesting.
Yes, you're right. It's very interesting. Once in my lifetime, I heard that there are no silos, which was very confusing. Trying to understand more, I talked to the person like, okay, what do you mean by there are no silos? And the person said, look, every team here, they are working in a part of the product, or they are building some part of the product or a feature or something. And it's part of the human way and also the curiosity to try to understand or hear what the other teams are also doing, because you feel more integrated. You feel part of the whole because you are dedicated to something very specific that you are building. You do not have much concerns about how what you are building will may or may not affect other points, because as you go into your planning and as you go into even the development, once you realize you are touching something that someone else is working, you are going to go there, talk to the person, and see how you guys can handle it, that right, and find a solution. However, this person explained that in a bigger picture level, people would like to know more, exactly because they are taking care of very specific things, which was a nice thought. But still, I use both of them.
Interesting. I definitely think there could be good reasons why people do it that way. Generally, I think it's always good to have a culture, like an open culture, where people are curious, right? Curious in a way that, oh, what do you actually work on? And maybe a lot of times communication like that can actually help to find some issues early on, or like spark an idea that will actually make it a lot better at the early stages, or maybe you'll find some dependencies. And I think it's also more about the care, like how much do you want to kind of like help and empower other departments and or other teams when you work on some cross team dependencies. And maybe if you highlight it early on, you can actually help them to plan ahead of time, make sure that they have proper solution in place. And
And what is the biggest challenge facing the world today, in your opinion?
right, that's a good question. And I think looking at it from the designer lens, I think a lot about this question when I go outside and interact with the outer world in different aspects. Is how do people come up with certain decisions and conclusions when they, I don't know, like let's say put a sign in your building downstairs saying that, I don't know, the floor is wet? Or how do they want to communicate to people that there is something happening on the road? There is a lot of different aspects, right? Like literally everything that we experience and see in the world is actually done, decided, or concluded by people, and eventually communicated by people as well. And I do believe that design is an intentional solution to a problem. And I think the key word here is intentional. So you do recognize there is a problem in this world. You learn more about this problem. You try to find out all the aspects of it. You also try to understand who are the people experiencing this problem, in what context, when does it happen. And so eventually, given this knowledge, you start to actually ideate based on the constraints, based on the context, based on how can you communicate this to people, what is the efficient way, and things like that. And what I see in the real world is it looks more like that was the first idea that came to our mind, so we decided to do it this way. And so I think the problem that the world is facing today, in my opinion, is that there is actually a lack of design thinking, and there's a lack of design thinkers as well, because it's not something that is very popular. I think everyone is kind of focusing on quick results, and I think that's kind of a problem, because we need to be more considerate. We need to be more thoughtful about the world about us and about humans. So there is pretty known discipline, or you can call it framework, in the design world, that's called human-centric design. And basically, they're kind of centering this whole concept around human. Like, who are the people? What kind of problems do they experience? What does human need in general in life, on this planet, in this world, in our society, and all those different aspects, right? You can always define the frame that you are operating in. But I don't even think that people actually practice that. I don't think that there is a awareness that things can be actually done more intentionally for human. I think there is various reasons why this could be happening. One of the interesting reasons is because a lot of times people actually prioritize profit, and profit as like, we just need to make it profitable so that we can continue doing our operation. Then the profit becomes a priority versus actually serving human needs. And it is understandable, right? But it's also an interesting kind of philosophical question to think about. Is that the society we want to live in? Like, do we actually want to prioritize profit over how people feel and what do they experience day to day and things like that? Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. And so I believe if design thinking could be a part of education, maybe a kindergarten daycare program, or at least starting from the school ages, I think it can help actually kids to start thinking differently and trying to understand what are we actually solving for, what are we optimizing for. Is the goal to actually just go and put a sign? Because a lot of times people just think transactionally as like, someone told me we need to put a sign, I'll just go do it and put it there, right? But I think important skill and important question here to ask is, but why? Right? And there's multiple frameworks that help you to work with those questions. There is a great book by Simon Sinek that's called Start with Why. I think that's a great one, and I think it had a big, profound impact on me and how I think and how I work. But there is also a framework of like the five whys, where you have to ask the question why 5 times. So you're just trying to kind of deduct to the root cause of like, or the root problem, what is actually there, like why are we doing this. And that is quite interesting because a lot of people actually do not ask those questions when they could, right? I think that's definitely one of the biggest challenges that the world is facing today. And imagine what the world would look like if our cities would be designed by people who actually practice design thinking. And I don't mean that those people have to be designers, right? I think that's the misunderstanding and misconceptions, that design belongs to designers, but I think design actually belongs to anyone. And intentionally or not, we are all making design decisions every day. You can start thinking about it from even, let's say, from IT jobs. Engineering folks actually design how the backend is going to work. Is that design? Yes, it is design. Is it going to impact the user experience? Yes, it will, because how fast the response is or how your data is being handled, those are all important questions for the end user. So it's not just the backend that you're, coding there for fun or for yourself or for the company. It is actually something that's going to impact people. That's just one example. All people essentially make the design decisions, and it's not just designers. And the way I see designers is that, and I think that's the definition of IDEO, one of the biggest design agencies, which is promoting this framework of design thinking. Designer is not a person who is making pictures and concepts and all the common kind of misunderstanding and stigmas. Designer is a person who is, again, solving a problem intentionally, who has understanding about the humans they're solving this problem for. And that person might have an expertise in a certain field, and that field can be anything. You might have an expertise in visual design, and that's good. It's going to be one aspect of design. But you also might have an expertise in anthropology, right? Because maybe you understand more about humans and how they live their life and what's important for them as a kind. You might also be a designer who has engineering skills. You might also be designer who has social sciences skills. You might also be designer who has any kind of skills you imagine, physics, being a doctor, or whatever else, right? Like, it's all design. Design, again, is more about intentional problem solving rather than actually visualizing something or drawing something. And I think that's also the misconception that we need to somehow resolve, because design doesn't just belong to designers. We are all designing things, and a lot of times we do it unintentionally, meaning that it's just I'll do it whichever way comes to my mind first, or whichever way our team is used to. Basically, that's the problem.
I understand. And this reminds me very interesting things. I had read a thesis, and is something that is maybe over 10 years. And in this thesis, there were no design thinking or even user experience. The term did not exist in that time. However, the person was explaining that when you are building a city, as you explained it, first they just let people walk by. They do not do anything, even when it is snowing. And after people just walk by, then they will finally come, take the footprints, and build the sidewalk following the footprints, instead of just keep doing the square shapes or even triangle or whatever. Because that is exactly where comes the best solution for that specific problem. And bringing this a little bit for the software world or technology or the things today, I could feel when he was speaking a very strong relationship about profit going against the human centric. So as you see here, there are a lot of companies out there that you can even check the numbers, and they are public, like Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Those companies, for example, they are losing by far for another company that's called TikTok. Somehow they are not offering, and they are not even solving the problems, or they are not even offering what people is looking for. Instead, people are going exactly to what is solving the problem and doing all the things they would like to, because it's more human centric, which is good. And if you go to the e-commerce, we have another example. We have a great company that is Amazon, is one of the biggest in the world. However, they are losing by far by other companies that are, for example, Temu, if I'm not mistaken, and Shein, that goes in a different direction. All of these companies are profitable, absolutely. However, as you mentioned, these other companies that are somehow winning the game and taking the spot, they are taking way more care about the user experience. They're not bringing to you frustrations. They are solving the problem that they are meant to without asking you further for that.
Yeah, I think I don't have any personal opinion about the companies. I mean, I do look at what they produce for the design community in terms of their, contributions, uh, like design systems or product processes or things like that. So that is always inspiring. That's always interesting to see how they solve the problem of design thinking or how they design better products for people. That is all interesting. But I think, again, like, I don't have any personal or affiliated opinion about them. I think it's just probably good and important call out that maybe the golden middle is kind of win-win when companies make profit while making lives of people better and easier in a way. And I think that's probably how we can try to, bridge the gaps and solve the problems while staying profitable. So I'm not saying that companies should not be profitable. They should be, of course, right? But I think it's also important to recognize the contributions. How do these companies actually contribute to the world, and what are they actually doing? One of the things that Grub is actually doing, considered that it's running transportation business in Southeast Asia, is that they actually contribute to some charity programs, first of all, but then they also contribute to the tree growing programs to kind of make up for the carbon footprint. And I'm not representing Grub here. It's more of like my personal observation as a user of Grub. That's something that I can see in the application as a user, regardless of me being an employee, or something that I can see elsewhere. But yeah, like that's definitely something that is important to keep in mind. But I think it's also most important to understand like what impact the products we create have on us as people, because I think it is also quite deep and philosophical question. When do you need to stop when you're designing something, right? Because you can actually go into depth of us human beings and the meaning of life, and whether we should be living on Earth or on Mars or travel in space or something else. I think there will be a limit to at some point when you'll not be able to actually make it profitable. And so that's why I think people always try to optimize for profit as fast as possible, and then somehow make it up. But I think it's interesting to see maybe more in a retrospective, like how things like social media, especially Facebook and Instagram, affect people's well-being. So I think it's not that it's their fault. It's more of the time aspect, because it actually takes time for us all as humanity to understand the impact and the problem that it actually can create, right? Because at first, I think designers and product people who came up with Instagram were like, hey, we want to create a social network that is easy to use while having some fun with the photos, because people do like to take photos. We know that nowadays there is a trend of making pictures looking retro, which is cool. So let's create those different filters. And as I remember, that's how Instagram started. It was more like a fun platform where people could, just take pictures of random things in their life and upload it to social media and show, oh, look what I found, look at this, look at that. And look at what it became eventually nowadays, right? It's an entirely different thing, in a way that it's less about photos now. It's more about videos. It's more about even like now there is also threads. It's about text, but it's all about stories. It's all about reels. Nowadays, a lot of those things are not even personal anymore. It's more like everyone is trying to do some sort of business in Instagram, and like, hey, how to become successful, how to become healthy. And so eventually this kind of cool thing that was fun as a photography tool became a social network for advertisement, right? And which also has some psychological side effects, especially for the younger generations, because um, since they're still young and they haven't seen the world enough yet, they actually judge the world by the things they see on Instagram, for example, and similar platforms. Like, I'm not saying anything specific about Instagram. It's pretty much any other similar platforms, right? Even TikTok or whatever else is available in other countries. And it does have an impact on, like, what do they think is okay in life, or what do they think success looks like, right? So basically looking at the advertisement and kind of validating themselves against and thinking, oh, I'm not successful because that ad or that video, that influencer is saying this is what success looks like. And eventually they're trying to kind of follow and copy. It does affect their lives, even though I think the root of this is that influencer is just trying to make money. And I think platforms like Instagram and TikTok and similar have not solved this social kind of problem yet, because again, it's kind of growing, and sometimes it looks like the products get out of control in a way that designers and product people, I think, underestimate the impact, like the psychological, emotional, and societal impact of the tool that you are creating. So I think it's important also to keep the ethics in mind of, like, what this thing is actually doing, like where are we going. And there is interesting field of design that not many people are aware of. That's called speculative design, and I actually like to refer to that. And I don't know why and how it actually got lost in general. Not many designers even know that speculative design is something that exists. If I give you a couple of examples, you will actually know precisely what speculative design is. So the goal of speculative design is to come up with something, some concept, which originally it came as like a physical kind of product concept, just to see how our lives might change if we would have this thinking in our real life, right? And at first it was more like, let's try to imagine, let's try to, like, fantasize what this thing is going to be like in our lives. And I think some of the early speculative designers tried to do it as physical objects, but nowadays it's actually done differently. Now we have a lot of tech, we have advanced filming crews, we have a lot of compute power to actually produce great videos and visuals and whatnot. And one of the biggest examples of speculative design is the TV show called Black Mirror. A lot of people don't think about it that way. They just think like, oh, it's science fiction. Yeah, it is kind of science fiction, right? Because, like, the authors of that show are just trying to show what the future might look like, right? But in the same time, if you think about it not as a fun show in terms of entertainment that you can watch in the evening after work, it is actually speculative design. And the goal of speculative design is to ask yourself and answer potentially some of the deep philosophical questions. Is that okay? Is that the society I want to live in? Do we need this technology? Or, okay, this technology looks great, but what's going to be impact on myself, my family, society, planet, and so on, right? And I think that's exactly what this TV show Black Mirror, for example, is trying to do. There is a number of other shows which also trying to do the same. One of the recent ones that I just watched is Cassandra, and it's quite interesting because it's kind of retro futurism, and that's more about the style of this TV show. But the problem they're trying to raise is, what happens if we keep going on with the generative AI we have today, and if we get to the point that we'll turn our smart homes that are pretty basic today into some kind of smart assistants that will actually walk around our house and will actually have lots of permissions to do on our behalf in the house, like not just only turning on and off the light, but also opening the doors, opening the windows, potentially having some kind of tools to slice your vegetables, to cook food for you, to bake something in the oven. Think about your house as like an API where you have lots of parameters you can control, and imagine you give those controls to an AI or a robot or a technology that's going to be doing those things for you. I'm not going to spoiler anything, but that's a great example of speculative design and how things can potentially go sideways because of us, delegating things to the technology. So that's a good one.
Wow, thanks a lot. I didn't knew that speculative design is what you explained, and I'm very happy to know now because also It sounds a lot like some kind of experimentation and prototypation, however, for other areas. And the design has its sound that is called speculative design. Thank you for that, Simon.
Yeah, my ex-coworkers telling me about it's just a theory, right? But I think it's also kind of a thing that falls into category of speculative design. He was saying, imagine if you would live in a society where governments do not exist, but instead we have a big machine which governs people's lives, and we have cameras everywhere, and it's going to be fair for everyone because that machine is actually checking literally everyone and everything. And if someone is violating something, they'll be punished immediately, but the same thing will happen to you. And I was like, I mean, it's an interesting concept, but in the same time, is that okay, right? And I think that's exactly the right kind of questions that we need to ask ourselves. And coming back to the point of intention in the definition of design, right? Because design is intentional solution to a problem. I think we need to be more intentional about such things as well, because what I'm afraid of is that one day we can, okay, we'll not wake up and this thing happens, but I'm afraid it can gradually happen so smoothly that we will not even notice the change. It's going to be like first we get generative AI, next we get those smart assistants that run our homes. Who knows? Maybe the next thing going to be a big mega machine that runs the entire planet, and it's going to be not going to be a human. I do not follow any conspiracy theories, or it's not like I'm a paranoid. I think it's just exactly the speculative design point. Like, hey, just try to imagine what would happen if you actually have that thing, or what would happen if this happens to our society, or what happens if we actually design it this way. So I think it's more about the questions, and I think we all need to ask those questions. And I'm not implying any certain answer. Maybe the answer is that it's good, and maybe that's the right thing to do. It's more about the debates that we need to be having, and we need to kind of dig deeper and try to understand what are the implications, what are the things that might go wrong, and what are the things that are great, and how can we actually benefit from this, right? So I don't see it as just black or white. I see it both as black and white, and we need to do proper weighting before we decide whether it's the right thing to follow.
Yes, I like very much what you said because it's basically what if. And this is very important because your work is extremely creative and you base yourself on that. And most of the time in things that do not exist yet, which you need to work out to go in a certain direction.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And Simon, how do you view professional development and continuing education? Because as I could see, and the persons who are listening to us now, you have been always being work, and at the same time, you have plenty of knowledge. And I could see that it's not only books and discussion with people, there's also papers from scientists that you have been following.
Yeah, so it's a big question and very interesting one. Definitely was a time when I followed lots of scientific papers. I think it all just started with reading some of those kind of self growth, maybe self help books about feeling better, being more healthy, and this and that and whatnot. And eventually, usually all those books mention some kind of research, and I just heard this research a lot more, and I started to be curious, and I was like, yeah, it's great to read those books, but what if I actually go and read those white papers myself? And so I found there is actually plenty of public information related to the research, and you can just go out there and find the research related to the topic you're interested in, and you can see how exactly it was done, what were the different methods, what were the conclusions, who are the participants. You can also try to see if there are any flaws in this research. And eventually I just read a lot about like human and health and whatever, but I think it's more of a hobby for me, because I mean, I'm just genuinely curious about myself and us as humans, and so I was like just going out and reading this. I think the important and interesting point here is about education. There's different views on education in different countries, and I think generally in the world there is sort of a shift nowadays as like, should education still be the same as it is today, right? And I think it should. I don't have an answer yet, so I think it's a mixed answer, right? It's like maybe it should not. Maybe some things should be preserved from the way it is today, but maybe we also need some change because nowadays the technologies move a lot faster. Like the new technology is being created a lot faster compared to how long does it take to actually learn something, right? And I think that's one of the biggest shift that is happening in the world and the industry, and we can see it now with the all the AI related tech and things like that. And basically I think if you now decide to go the traditional ways of learning, as like I'm going to take deep dive into a topic of computer science, and maybe by the end of this course in 3 years I will learn about generative AI. I'm afraid in 3 years, generative AI will be so much different that your knowledge will be not relevant anymore. And so, that leads me to a point of how do I see, professional development and education myself. And the way I see it is different. So generally, I think there is two approaches how I see it myself, and I borrowed this method from elsewhere. That method is called progressive JPEG. You probably remember in the past how images were loading on the slow internet, and so there was two ways of loading images. One where image is being loaded line by line, and so basically you can open a picture of let's say, I don't know, a car or a robot or something else like a human, and eventually it loads so slow that first you just see something blurry, you don't even understand what's there. Then you start seeing like a couple of pixels of hair. Then you start seeing, like, I don't know, a little bit of the forehead, and it's loading so slow that eventually by the point you load the entire human, it's going to be like a couple of hours. Okay, I'm just referring to this like 56K internet in the old days. But then eventually there was an invention that's called progressive JPEG. And so what does progressive JPEG do? When you load progressive JPEG with a slow internet, it will actually load entire picture in its original size fully at first, but it's going to be blurry, which is okay. But you start understanding that, oh, so actually there is something in the center of this image that is, I don't know, yellowish, and it's on the green background. Then basically, step by step, it starts adding more details to it. And eventually, maybe after 2 or 3 steps, you already see that, oh, it's a human or it's a car or whatever else you load the picture of. And so the difference here is in the way how you actually progress, right? Like one way of progressing is seeing entire picture from the beginning, even though it's blurry. And another one is actually trying to kind of detail it one by one. As a metaphor to this thing, there is also a famous analogy. I think it was in Jeff Patton's book about story mapping. And I think it's generally being talked in IT and agile community as like how to develop in agile way. And there is this famous picture showing a skateboard, how you progress from a skateboard to a car. And so there are two ways. The first way is first you have skateboard, the second is you have a scooter, third you have a bicycle, fourth you have a motorbike, and then fifth you have a car. The alternative way is that you have first one wheel of a car, then you have second wheel of a car, and it kind of doesn't make sense, right? Because what can you do with those two wheels? It doesn't ride. So I think that the point here is actually get the entire picture first, so it rides in some way, because your main goal is actually to ride, right? So your goal is to get from point A to point B. And if you use a car wheel, you will not be able to get from point A to point B unless you are very creative. You rather have a skateboard, so you can actually push and roll. And so coming back to this like progressive JPEG, as I frame it, a lot of people, and I think the traditional education, I don't know whether it's the right word to say, force you to go the path of not progressive JPEG and having the car wheel first. But a lot of times it's actually true. I observe it in terms of how other people learn. I observe how a lot of courses and classes are structured as like, we're gonna have in-depth thing into this topic, and we're gonna cover up everything from the beginning. We'll have to, I don't know, have a deep dive, and maybe after 3 years of time you will actually learn to do something great. So I myself believe that this method it kind of does work, but also it doesn't work. So the reason why it doesn't work is exactly because now technologies progress very fast, and you actually have to learn a lot, and you have to learn big topics. The other interesting thing is, there is science and there is applied science. So science is more about theory, and it's more about like having this fundamental approach where you actually do the non-progressive JPEG. And maybe for some cases it's okay, but there is applied sciences, and the goal of applied sciences is actually being practical. So you don't just learn physics for the sake of learning physics. You are actually learning physics to, I don't know, create an engine that runs on water, right? So bizarre example, but you actually have a goal in mind. You have a goal in mind to create efficient energy production. You have a goal in mind to create a vehicle that is, I don't know, eco-friendly or something else, right? So that is the point of applied science. And so you can think of my views on education as applied way of learning. There is always a goal that you have in mind. Like, why do you actually want to learn this? They want to learn it so you have the best knowledge, so you can tell your friends and family that, oh, I learned this topic, now I'm great? Or do you actually want to learn it because you want to build something? And so I think there was also interesting thing about 2 or 3 years ago. I asked one of my coworkers who is a front ender, and I asked him like, hey, I want to learn front end, like how long does it take? And he told me, don't even start, it's going to take you 3 years. My actual goal was to build something using code, right? I'm a designer and I didn't know how to code, but I was like, would be nice if I can build something. The way I decided to frame my problem is that I need to learn front end. And when I went to trusted sources, like this my ex coworker, he told me, oh, it's going to take at least 3 years. Don't even start it. You'll waste your time. And actually, I didn't do it. What I did instead is I didn't start with front end. If you trace back to my original goal, my original goal was actually to build something. And so I thought, okay, forget about this front end thing. I will just have fun with different things. I got a Raspberry Pi as my home kind of lab for fun, and I started playing with it. And so my goal was at first to understand Linux better, to see how things work, and my goal was to build to explore some web projects that I can run at home, maybe like some smart home automation and things like that. And so eventually I did it. It was actually pretty fast and easy to do it by following very specific tutorials or YouTube videos and articles and forums. You just go and dig it and you find the knowledge that you actually need to know, right? I think the key point here from this my experience is that I didn't need to take a course on Linux, even though I had this thing in mind, and I was like, should I get like a command line, a few books on command line, and like learn all the commands and be an expert in Linux and everything? And I did get those books. The thing is that I didn't read it, and I also think it's good that I didn't read them, because I would actually spend a lot of time, and I'm not sure if this knowledge would be useful for me. Eventually, all these generative AI technologies came out. Eventually, now we have ChatGPT and similar large language models that can actually answer a lot of your questions, which are very specific to your problem. So, what I found out eventually is that I actually progressed so much in the specific topic of running some applications and doing self hosted solutions and even creating some micro apps for myself. And the way I achieved it is specifically by following my original goal. My own goal was to build things for fun or to build some things myself, right? My goal was not to learn front end. My goal was not to learn Linux or command line. As a side effect of my goal, I learned to understand what Docker is. I know how to deploy containers. I know how to tweak those containers. I know how to play with them. Basically, I run a lot of different self-hosted things on my own machine. I have my own large language models. I have workflows, all kind of things. And I was like, oh, I'm even able to read logs, troubleshoot it. I know how to go to curl logs of that specific container. I know how to work with command line. I cannot say I'm an expert in command line, definitely not. Do I know some things that are useful for me, for myself? Yes. Do I still use Notepad to store some of my commands because they're too long? Yes, I do. The thing is, I think if I would start learning front end 3 years ago, maybe by this point I would be able to like do something, right? But actually, I didn't start learning front end, and by this point, I know, I wouldn't say a lot more, But I think personally I achieved a much better result because I'm able to build the things I wanted, and that was a shortcut. In this way, I would probably say, and maybe that's a good segue, like what kind of advice I could give people who is trying to learn maybe some topics or maybe specifically in design. I think try to understand what you actually want to learn. And if your answer is that I want to learn design, or I want to learn product design, or I want to learn whatever it is, right? Some people say like UX design. There is no such thing as learn UX design. There is also a similar thing. Since English is not my native language, I had to learn it myself. It was partially school, it was partially university, it was a lot of self efforts. And so eventually I'm able to speak, understand, watch videos, and being fluent enough to actually have a conversation. And a lot of my friends ask me, so how do I learn English? And I ask them, but what do you want to do? Because there is no way to learn English. You cannot learn entire English. There is no end. Like, how do you define the end? How do you define the success point that actually now you have learned English, right? So the goal you should be setting for yourself is that I want to learn English at the level of B1, for example, because there are some objective ways to measure it. You can take a test online, right? And I think in that case, your goal will be, I want to learn, let's say, English at B1 level according to that test. It's going to be even that specific. It's not going to be at B1 in the entire world, because maybe in Australia the definition of B1 is different than in the US. And I think that's important to understand, like the context that you're trying to learn this. The same thing with design. You cannot learn design because, like, I even myself, I cannot define the boundaries. Okay, if I dig long enough, I will probably say, okay, I know this, I know this, I know this, but maybe I don't know something else. But it's really hard to define the boundaries. Where does design start? When pre-humans discovered fire and started to collect wooden sticks and like draw on the wall, right? Maybe even further. Like there is a lot of things that can be considered design, and it's really hard to actually focus and learn something about design when you have such a goal. And the same thing with learning front end or learning AI or learning large language models. You always need to have actually very specific definition of what you want to learn. And that's why I think it's more like applied way of learning. Nowadays, it's a lot easier to do it with all the technologies like ChatGPT and different kind of LLMs and different kind of assistants. You can also read books differently. So once I was reading a book about how to read books, weird enough. So before I thought the book is there so you can actually read it cover to cover. So you have to read it, the entire book. And I think that's the way they teach us in school, that like, hey, when you read a book, you read the entire book. When I read a book, how to read books, on how to read books, what I actually learned is that you don't have to read all books. The books are there for you as a helpful material. You decide yourself which part is useful for you. So for example, you have gaps in this like three, I don't know, different points, and if that book answers your question, just go and read those 3 points, because you will extract that knowledge for yourself. You don't have to read through entire book. Or sometimes it is also okay to skim through the book, meaning that you don't read, you don't try to like digest literally every single piece of information from this book. You just try to understand, first of all, in general, what this book talks about, by kind of skimming the chapters and trying to understand and make sense of it, but then deciding for yourself which part resonates with you most and which part you want to actually dive deeper. Definitely this doesn't work with fiction. You should read fiction and enjoy it as it is, but what I mean is non-fiction and education, right? So if you talk about education, you should definitely use the applied methodology to that. And so looking at this from kind of future world perspective, I do believe that the best way of education for kids and generally for people of any age is to actually set a very clear goals of what you actually want to achieve, and follow these goals and cater the knowledge that you need to achieve that goal, instead of diving deep into just something generic. Unless maybe the role you want to have is something more like a philosopher, or like an expert in social sciences, and maybe your goal is actually to debate with people. So I guess if you want to debate with people and you want to be well versed in different topics on philosophy, great. Maybe you should have as diverse kind of data set for yourself in philosophy as you can. That's definitely a thing. When it comes to something more practical, you want to learn a new skill, maybe you should try to understand how to achieve exactly that. Of course, maybe it's also good and important to know what are the related subjects, or it's always good to also have a skill of zooming in and zooming out, because let's say you want to build something, but this something always exists in a bigger context, and so always try to understand part of which big context it is, and ask yourself a question: do I need to know about that or not? Because maybe if you try to abstract from like front end or building self-hosted apps and Linux, maybe I do not need to know about the history of Linux. It's kind of, okay, it's kind of good to know. It's fun to know, but maybe I can just watch a documentary one evening about Linux, and it's going to be more of a fun experience, rather than I will force myself and say, first I need to learn the history of Linux, and only after that I will start learning my first commands in command line, right? So it's more of defining what matters now and what can be done later. So
Very good, Simon. The next question, I think you already answered, but it's okay if you would like to dive into it. What advice would you give to someone starting in your field? And I think you pretty much answered talking about education, about the part of experimentation, also figure out actually what you want to achieve.
I think the point here is that, so a lot of people, first of all, they of course have this mindset that they want to learn product design, or they want to learn a UI UX design. I've heard different requests like that, and they say, okay, I want to become a UX designer, so which course do I take? A lot of people actually start thinking about Figma. They're like, okay, I will learn Figma, now I'll become a product designer. The answer is no, you will not, because Figma will not take you to the point that you will build apps. Especially, it will not lead you to the point that you will build great apps or solutions or software or whatever that is, right? The reason why is because Figma knowledge is not enough. Figma is just a tool, and this tool can be replaced by something else soon enough, especially with the generative AI. There might be different methods of how we create things as designers, as makers, as product people. And what is most important in design is actually understanding design as a process, design as a framework. It is actually understanding that design is an intentional way of solving certain problems. So you actually have to learn more about problem discovery. So I think that is more important skill to know, is actually understanding the people experiencing the problem, the context where this happens. And you also need to know all the tools that help you with that. Things like customer interviews. You have to learn to ask good questions. Again, we are getting quite far away from Figma, but that's the truth, right? Because Figma will not get you there, but customer interviews will get you there. And that's the problem of a lot of designers that I mentor as well, is that they're actually thinking that the tools will get them where they want, but that's not the reality. You actually have to dig more into the problem space. You need to learn design as a set of different tools and methods that you can use. And so you actually do need to go talk to customers. You also don't just go talk to customers. There is structure and methodology to that. You don't want to ask your customers different questions and then having a hard time to interpret the findings. Your goal is actually to ask the same set of questions to different people, so then you can actually compare it against each other and arrive at some insights. And that is definitely important. You also need to try to actually visualize the experience of people using different methodologies like journey maps, for example, or process diagrams and things like that. Your goal is to try to understand what do people actually do, or what people are trying to do. I mean, it's a challenging thing to learn. Even I myself, for example, a lot of times when I start working on a new project or a new product, I might not know the audience, and people might come to me and say, so we need to do this, tell us what's the best way. And my answer in that case would be, I don't know. The reason why I don't know is because I don't know enough about the problem to actually give you the right solution. Because first I need to learn more about the people. First we need to try to visualize this problem somehow. We need to identify the weak points, It's also important to learn to prioritize. And I don't mean just personal prioritization. It's more of problem prioritization. When you talk to people, when you discover there is different problems, how do you define which problem is most pressing? And that is an important skill. You should of course validate the problem prioritization with the customers and users themselves as well, because maybe you don't feel the same pain as they do, and you should try to understand their perspective, which is quite important. And there is lots of other different things and practices and methods that you need to learn besides Figma or the design software. You also need to learn how to talk to people, and you actually have to talk to people a lot. And the other quite important thing to learn is also how to deal with conflicts and how to resolve them, because a lot of people think that a typical day of a designer is like, I come to office, I have a cup of coffee, I turn on some favorite music, put the headphones in, and go and do something fun in Figma, and by the end of the day I will show it to people, they will approve it, and then we ship it. Ideal day. But the reality is actually not this. The reality is that a lot of people have different priorities, and they all want you to do some work that you might not have enough knowledge about, because you actually haven't talked to all customers yet, and you need to talk to more of them. There is also people with potentially opposing opinions, because maybe your teammates are on the same page with you, but some stakeholders actually have a different viewpoint. So how are you going to resolve this? This is design, right? Design is about intentional solution to a problem. And in that sense, it actually has very little to do with Figma itself. Figma is more like a tool that helps you achieve something tangible, but actually it's not the place where design happens. I mean, okay, with FigJam, it can happen there, but it still need to take the entire process and the understanding of the problem. So definitely the advice is focus more on the definitely design methodologies and practices. Try to understand that more better from maybe from experienced designers or people working in product. But also importantly, you do need to gain experience in people skills. You basically or in people's situations, because you need to resolve conflicts, you need to prioritize, you need to convince people a lot, you need to sell. So sales and marketing is also quite important skill, because a lot of times you are not just justifying the value of yourself as a designer, you also need to convince people and explain that way of designing is actually the best way out of those that we considered. So I think those would be the general advices. There is, of course, a lot more to that. Talking to some designers in the field or product people will probably give you more perspective on that.
Okay, thank you. And it's very good advice because you mentioned that tools, they are important. However, you may not have the tool always, and there are times that also you need to build your own tools in order to get the work done. Goes back to the things that you had mentioned as well about the experimentation, because there are times that through experimentation you figure out better ways of doing things. So thank you very much for that, Simon. And I would like to know, how has your career identity evolved over the years?
That's a good question and quite reflective too. I started working in the field of design quite a long time ago when I was still a student. I had a passion to making things since I was a kid. Later, it started to manifest as drawing things, and I was drawing things for fun. It was more like I think somehow connected to my making passion, and I thought that if I draw some things, maybe I will learn to draw things that I can build potentially or things like that. And so I started first as a more or less a graphic designer, because back in the days there was the maturity of the design industry was not that great. There was like very few sources where you can learn from, and I was just considering myself as like a graphic designer. But again, I was just a student, so I was kind of doing things. And I think my journey is more of reflection on how the industry has changed as well, because you can see that when I was graphic designer, pretty much everyone else was a graphic designer. Also, sometimes people call themselves web designer. I think there was certain times when I also thought myself as a web designer, because a lot of times, so I worked for a local agency that would create some kind of advertisement websites for the local business, and most of the times, like, that's what people wanted. And for me as a student, that was a great way to get some income and to learn and things like that. And so it was kind of like web design and graphic design, which is kind of funny to think about it now. And then eventually I got some experience. I worked at some software company as a UI designer. And I think that was the first touch point when I was introduced to actual software and to actual UI, as like not just a website, but the applications. And that was the time when the first smartphones started to appear, both iPhones and Androids. And I had a chance to work on some of the very first applications. But I was still considering myself as a UI designer, because back in the days, still there was some people like project managers or business analysts who would actually come up with all the requirements, which is also quite interesting. That was definitely not very intentional way of solving a problem. It was maybe more intentional way of solving problem of delivering something fast for profit, right? It's like, let's just get this up done, and the best way we can do it is by whatever comes to mind first, or almost like that. Like sometimes we would improve on some logic, but usually it was very basic, as like, let's just put it together like this and ship it and see what happens. Maybe we'll get some feedback and work on it more. And so I was a UI designer, and I think there was already like this emerging need of understanding that actually there is more to design than just UI, and there is UX aspect as like user experience. But also it's quite interesting to look at it like more than 10 years ago. I think it was probably 15 years ago, if not more. The UX design was also perceived quite interestingly as like transitions between the screens. And that's how a lot of people in the industry perceived it, even designers. They were like, I'm doing UX because I actually show how this button will transition to the next screen. And I even believed that at some point. And I think a lot of designers and people in the industry thought that's the way, that's how we do design. And there was like common job title back in the days, UI UX designer, which in fact I think if you look at it, it was more of like UI design actually. I myself and other folks were pretty much focusing on how we do the buttons, how we do forms, how we do things like specifically to the UI, but not actually seeing the bigger picture. And I think so over years it evolved. I got a lot more experience. I worked a little bit at gaming company. I was doing a poker game. I was also working on the UI. I think that was actually was kind of mind shifting experience for me at that company, because there was someone with a job title of game designer. I was like, I don't understand what's going on. So I'm a UI designer, but you're a game designer. How come? Like, what's going on? So what do you actually do? And so once I met that person in the office, and we went for lunch or something, and I asked him, so can you tell me what you actually do? And so he tells me that, oh yeah, I write design documents for the game. I basically think through the entire logic of the game, how it should be working, what should be the, like, the characters and the story, and I do all the math. I calculate how users will do this, how to keep them engaged, and all the things. And I was like, oh, that is very interesting. And then I realized that what I'm doing is actually something wrong, because I'm actually just touching the surface, and I'm actually not designing the game at all. The person who designed the game is that person. And so then the notion of product design started to emerge in the world, and people started to talk about product design, and the title of product designer started to appear. And I was like, oh, so product design is like game design, but in product, like in software products. And so I already had a good understanding what that actually means, because it's not just the surface level. It is actually about the entire logic of this thing, how it's going to work, what kind of problems it's going to solve for the people. Is it going to be engaging? How people use it in context one and context two, and what could be the constraints, what can go wrong, and things like that. Eventually I became a product designer, still calling myself a product designer nowadays. It gets into an interesting point that yes, I'm a product designer. With the emergence of all those generative AI things, I'm like, some people tell me like, oh, you have product management skills. And I'm like, yeah, because I have product in my job title, right? So I do understand the product. Since I'm also quite engaged with all of those technologies and self-hosting web apps and playing with LLMs and creating workflows and automation, I'm like, is it changing, right? Like, is there a big change? Is there some shift happening in the industry? And the short answer is, I think yes. I think something is going on. And generally, I consider myself more of a maker nowadays because I think my goal is to make things. I still do call myself a product designer, but somewhere deep inside, I'm also thinking my goal is actually to make things that solve people's problems. And the way I do it is by using design methodology. But in the same time, I guess with all of those tools and the generative AI and everything, it just empowers you to do a lot more that you usually used to do. You actually getting your hands dirty with the code, even though you might not understand the code entirely, but you use those tools like Copilot, or you use tools like Cursor or ChatGPT or whatnot, right? There is like a new tool every day pretty much. And then you start questioning, so what's going to happen to the industry? How is it going to affect us designers? What's going to happen to front end? So I think there is not much to worry yet for us, because we still need to have critical thinking. We still need to guide the technology. But I think what's interesting is that now designers can actually deal with code. And one of my goals for this half of the year is actually to build my first Figma plugin, which is surprising. I would never think that in my life, even in the last year, that I would ever come up with something like Figma plugin, because it's code. It's an application that runs inside of another application. How could I possibly do this? And this is quite an interesting shift, and how career identity changes with all the technologies that are coming up, because now I don't associate design with just visuals or workshops or customer research anymore. Now design expands to the point that I'm actually experimenting with code. I'm experimenting with the workflows, and I'm generally trying to solve the problems with more tools and with more different methods, which is quite interesting. So yeah, excited to see where it all lead us.
Very interesting, also exciting, because there are more possibilities, and you are somehow augmented by AI tools now.
AI tools are everywhere nowadays. I'm pretty much losing track, like what's going on. The speed of delivery of these new tools is so high. Just last week, there was okay, a couple of weeks ago, there was like a few new models. There is like O3. The first there was DeepSeek, then there was O3, then there was like 5 more new tools. I was like, wait, what's going on? Can we slow down, please? Because I cannot even learn one of them yet, but there is 5 more.
Yes, you are right. And you had mentioned something related to this before when you was talking about education, right? The way that things are moving and changing, shifting so fast that we are actually lagging behind, because we do need time to learn that. What do you think, Simon, that are the common misconceptions people have about your role?
I think one of the very most common misconceptions is that design makes things look good, especially in the tech oriented teams. Engineers just think like, I'll just bring this problem to the designer, they will make it look good. And yeah, I mean, they are not wrong, right? Because I think there is a lack of open knowledge that, hey, actually design does a lot more. And I think maybe over time, over years, the collective knowledge will be different, and maybe everyone will understand that design does something else. But I think for now, the only thing that's left for us designers is to actually do the sales and marketing, and actually go and educate your peers, your teams that you work with. Not educate in like a way that like, hey, you have to learn this or you have to learn that, but I think it's more of showing by example as like, hey, yes, we might make things look good, but actually we're doing a lot more, and making things look good is just the tip of the iceberg. And yeah, like all the things I mentioned previously about the different design methods, understanding the problem space better, visualizing it, talking to customers, prioritizing it, talking to people, resolving conflicts, and all things like that. Those are all the things that designers do besides making things look great. There is good ways to measure it, to people who do not know, and I think there is such scale pretty much in any domain, even if it's engineering, I guess, or data or any kind of science. There is a maturity scale, and generally you can always come up with any scale from 1 to 5 or from 1 to 10, and you can try to measure where you are today. And so I think that's just a good tool to use to understand like where you are at with a specific people or a specific set of people, like how much do they actually understand your domain or your expertise. And I think it's important to set a goal that they should actually understand it at the highest level possible, so they always know what to go to you with.
All right, thank you. I would say that I do not think like that. I feel you because in general, right, people that are from different fields, which is totally fine. They even call us IT guys, right? And then they computer and say, "Can you fix my computer?"
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And how has your sense of identity evolved over time?
That's a good question. I think it's related to the career, and like professional identity a lot as well. But I also think that it's a big philosophical question too, because at first I grew up in a small town in Russia, and you first have an identity of a person from this town of like only 400,000 people, and it's pretty small. There is nothing much going on, and somehow you think that this is your reality. So it's quite interesting because maybe it was also happening because I was a lot younger when I was there. I actually relocated more than 10 years ago to Vietnam, so it's been a while. But I was like, let's say, a 20-year-old student, and when that was the case, I was always thinking that okay, that's my reality, that's my universe. And maybe the biggest thing that can happen is maybe I will relocate to another bigger city within Russia, like Moscow or something. And basically, it's kind of I think also you are limited by the environment that you are living in. Like somehow, maybe not even limited. Limited is too negative way to say it. I think a better way to say it, you are influenced a lot by the people, by the values, by the beliefs around that. And I don't mean people in Russia. I mean specifically people in a small town. And if you move to like a big, you can just do an experiment and move to different cities in different parts of the world, and you can actually see how that like not affects in a bad way, but how it influences your thinking about the world of who you are and what kind of life you live. And so when I was living in my own hometown, I basically had this picture of the world. I never even thought that I would work for international companies. I never thought that I would move somewhere. And I really thought that the best I can do is just move somewhere like to a bigger city. And then eventually somehow it happened that I learned about Southeast Asia. I was curious to travel. And so I thought, okay, I will just go. And so I decided to go. I made a move, and in Vietnam, I was also living in a few different cities. So I also had an experience of living in a small town in Vung Tau, which was quite interesting and reflective. But also that experience was raising a lot of questions of who I am, what am I doing with my life, why am I here, where do I want to be. And to be honest, I didn't have the answers to those questions. And I think it was like a pivot point for myself, because I was like, do I still want to live that like like life in a small town where I used to live, my hometown, or do I actually want to move elsewhere? And so my call was I want to move elsewhere, but I still didn't know what it could be. And so later I lived in another city by the beach in Niachang, also for half a year. I found it at first it was quite exciting. I thought, oh, it's so great to live by the beach because you can go swim just across the road and it's nice and everything. But then eventually I realized that it's good, but it doesn't have a community. I found it quite limiting for myself as a professional because this city is pretty much about tourism, and you can find restaurants and bars, but if in terms of community and events, if you go, if you try to find something, most likely it's going to be something tourism related. And I realized that I have nothing to do with this. I'm an IT guy at least, or I'm a designer, right? Like it depends on how you generalize yourself. I was like, that's definitely not what I want to experience. And during this time, I have already been to Ho Chi Minh quite a few times. It was more than 10 years ago, I think like 11 years ago. And I always thought how interesting, how diverse Ho Chi Minh is because of how many people from different parts of the world live in here, how the industry is being shaped in terms of IT, how different people contribute to this culture and industry. And I thought I want to be a part of it, right? So my identity started to change as like I want to live this kind of international life. I want to be a part of this big international community. I want to contribute to it. I want to experience it and things like that. Eventually, I got two job offers. One was from Lazada and one was from Atlassian. And somehow things moved faster with Lazada. And yeah, that's how I moved to Ho Chi Minh. And eventually, I realized, oh, that's the place. That's the place to be. And so I think it also coincides with the moment of like maturity and actually growing up, because I was working for a while I was a student, but I was still quite young. I was like, I don't even know what I want in my life and things like that. I think the moments of my professional growth also happened in the same time with my growing up time in here in Vietnam. And so I was growing both professionally and personally here, and that's been quite an interesting experience. And it's also interesting how identity of being just a person or like individual kind of changed over time, because at some point you start thinking, so okay, I'm living my life, I'm making some money, but what is this all for, right? Like what's the bigger purpose, what am I doing? And so I realized that yes, definitely I do want to contribute to the community. I do want to leave a mark in the history of design, IT, or whatever it is. But in the same time, I was also questioning, and I think that was more of the Stoic philosophy that was a part of my readings. I was like, but we are not infinite as humans, right? Like we do not live our lives forever. That is also quite interesting because I think when I was like 20 years old, you don't think about this stuff. You just think, oh yeah, I am myself and I forever will be. And then you think that you just somehow think by default that you can live as it is forever and nothing will change. But actually things change, and the most important thing is that you are aging, like as a human, right? Like you have a limited lifespan and you have to recognize it, you have to admit it. And so you have very limited time frame to do certain things in life. You have limited health resource, however you look at it. Even if you eat the most healthy food and even if you exercise most than other people and so on and so on, you will still age, you have to admit it. And so for me, I think it was a question of like, what legacy do I want to leave in the world? And of course one part was the intellectual legacy, but the other part was that it was actually realization that it's not like the question naturally came to my mind like actually, so what do you want? And since you're not going to live forever, you actually have to also do some intellectual legacy in a human form to continue your life, not as yourself as a person, right, but as maybe yourself as like your maybe your concepts or something like that. And yeah, then I became a father. That also changed the identity somewhat, because once you're a father, you start looking at the world a little bit different. I wouldn't say like your world changes top to bottom. No, it doesn't work this way. You are still the same. You are still Simon, or you are still Nay, and you're still having your job, and you're still having your interests, you're still having your hobbies. Everything is the same. But I think you start questioning more things in terms of like what we talked about today, like social influences, right? Like what happens outside. Do you want your kids to watch Instagram? Do you want them to consume all those things in YouTube? And what kind of education do they get? And you start questioning things about, education, society, and things like that. Like, do you actually want them to take the traditional education, or do you want them to, use more like applied approach? Do you want to encourage them to actually build things and try things and make things while they're kids? And yeah, the answer is definitely yes. And I think you start questioning of not just how I want to live the life for myself, but like how do we build this world that is going to be okay for our kids, right? So I think that's something that changes in the kind of perception and identity. Location definitely influences who you are in general. Like whichever country or part of the world you move, even if it's a forest somewhere far away, it will definitely change you and shape you. I think also one of interesting points, and I don't know if it fits here or not, it's more of a professional viewpoint, right? I think it's important that designers who design products for other humans are actually experienced in life, right? And it sounds maybe like a big, crazy kind of requirement. But what I mean by that is if you're a student, and I'm not biased, I'm not saying that students should not like will not have this experience, but generally saying students do not have enough life experience, for example, to compare things like what is okay and what is not okay. And I'm primarily reflecting how I was thinking myself and what kind of experience I had myself. And I think the key point here is that you cannot design a 5-star service yourself if you never experienced it. And that is very important point. Like you actually need to understand what distinguishes a good service versus the bad one. And that's the reason why you actually have to travel. That's the reason why you have to try those fancy restaurants. That's the reason why you have to try those fancy hotels. I don't say you have to stick with it and like only choose that. I think for designers, what's important is that you have a variety of experiences. You have to try what a $10 hotel looks like, but in the same time, you should also try what the 5 stars looks like, and maybe you should also try something in between, and maybe something that is completely off the menu, as like I don't know, Airbnb that doesn't look any standard experience at all, or like a tree house, something entirely different. So the more diverse experience you have, the better it will shape you. I think probably as a person, as a professional, mostly professional. Empathy is a good thing if you just try to imagine how it would feel if I would be in the shoes of that person. But it's always better if you experience something firsthand. You should experience the good things and the bad things as well. Like sometimes maybe you have to go to a place that will give you a bad service, and it doesn't mean it's a good thing for you generally, but it's a good thing for your experience, because now you know that this is actually a bad experience, and this is something we should not do in our products or our services that we build and design, something like that.
Yes, you mentioned that you build experience by trying yourself and putting yourself at proof, which is extremely important because the same as you, I noticed that as more as we are advancing our education, we have a huge amount of knowledge and we did not actually experience that. And that is where comes what you had mentioned, for example, about AI. The first AI model was built in 1943, 80 years back.
Well,
By that time, we did not have the computational power to try it out.
no. Yeah.
We are not using or doing or even building AI. What we have is a kind of copy paste that somehow is keeping us busy and we are interacting with it. There are no learning there, there are no thinking there, there are no problem solving there, as you mentioned. There's nothing, there's not even critical thinking, nothing. Simon, it was very good talk with you. In my mind, this was a very good episode where we could talk about user experience, human centric. We could talk about also different kind of views over things, not only about generations, but people coming from different places, diversity, silos, AI, pretty much everything. I'm very happy to be able to talk with you. It was impressive. I'm very happy to have you here. And we are coming to an end, and I would like to know your final thoughts.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you for having me. It was a great opportunity to talk and share my thoughts. It's also always exciting to think and reflect on those topics we discussed today, because that actually brings us to new perspectives and new learnings, and that's always great. So I think generally, saying I would be always happy to talk, whether it's your company or you want to maybe spread the knowledge about design thinking, design methodologies at your org. Feel free to reach me out, and would be happy to find what's the best way to actually inspire your team or your org. Always happy to talk at the conference or event, or if you want to inspire your team or your organization, feel free to reach me out, and we'll find what's the best way, what's the best format to share ideas and design, practices, methodologies, and things like that. Yeah, also, I'm available for consulting. If you have a startup or if you have a company and you want to improve your design strategy, I can be an advisor for you in that case. So please do reach me out. We can come up with a plan on how to improve and what kind of things we can do better to have a proper design strategy and make products that people love.